The federal eviction moratorium is set to end on July 31st. In both December and March, Congress set aside nearly $50 billion in rental assistance via COVID relief packages. But state and local governments are having issues distributing the money to those in need. By the end of May, 22 states and 104 cities and counties had only spent 1% of those funds. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News reporter Sarah Ewall-Wice. Hi there, Sarah. So how are state and local governments ensuring the correct people receive their payments?
Hi, Elaine. Thanks for having me. So really, this program was funded by the federal government. Congress passed the funds, and then it was allocated to states and counties. So keep in mind, folks who are applying for the rental assistance, be it renters directly or small-time landlords who are in need of funds, are applying through their counties, through their states, through their tribal authorities, depending specifically on where they live. And to that end, there are a number of requirements folks have to meet to be eligible for funds. There are income thresholds to make sure these are reaching low-income individuals, those who have been really hard hit by the pandemic. In terms of getting aid, there is also requirements for how much you can get for rent. It depends on fair rental pricing in your specific area. And there's other documentations that they'd have to provide to apply for the funding. With that said, this funding really can help a ton of people who have been hurt by the pandemic. Folks applying for funds, either landlords or renters, can actually apply for funds dating as far back as March 13th, 2020. Depending on the program that they're in, the funds can also be used to cover utilities if they've been struggling to pay those, as well as in some cases, depending on the program, paying future rent as well. So while it pays back rent for those who've been unable to meet their bills, it also could potentially help keep people in their homes in the future by providing a couple of months of rent moving forward, depending on where they're at. But it really is administered at a state and local level, so folks need to look and see how it's being administered in their state where they're at and how to apply for it.
So, Sarah, if that's the case, if it could potentially cover all of those things, why are some renters hesitant then to participate in these assistance programs?
I think one thing with officials I've spoken to at a state and federal level is there's hesitancy to get involved in any government program in some cases. There's a lack of trust there. There's also struggles for folks to actually say they need help and to let the government know they need help, putting themselves on the government radar. So that is one hesitancy. I spoke to a Virginia housing official, and she'd been working on a state rental assistance program since last year before focusing on these federal funds that are going out as well. And she said she's spoken to folks. One of the things that she's heard is people believe it's too good to be true, and they don't exactly understand what the program is. So there's a lack of understanding in some cases and awareness. Folks think it's a loan program and they're worried they won't be able to pay back the loan. The thing is this emergency rental assistance is not a loan program. It's a grant program. They will not have to pay the government back. They will not have to pay interest in that way. So that is something that takes explaining in some cases to make sure folks understand exactly what it is. But it has led to hesitancy based on what I've had, conversations I've had with some people.
Well, Congress previously approved more than $46 billion in rental assistance, but as of the end of May, only $1.5 billion has been distributed to those in need. What happens to the money, Sarah, if it doesn't get sent out by July 31st?
So the goal is to get as much money out to those who need it as possible, but funds will continue through the summer and fall and into future years as well, as it is available. With that said, housing advocates did raise alarms about that number, that $1.5 billion number, basically telling me what a tragedy would be. It's a tragedy under any circumstances for someone to be evicted, but especially so when there's so much support and funding available to help people who've been really hurt by this pandemic through no fault of their own to stay in their homes. But with that said, I do have some good news. Since those Treasury numbers did come out, there has been a ramp up in many cases for funding to go out. I've been told one of the we know about this is these programs really had to be built from the ground up at a state and county level. So when we knew the funds were in the works and coming down the pipeline, state and local officials started building their programs from scratch, and that took a good part earlier this year. They had to build the systems to get the funding out. They had to hire staff to review applications. So it did take a lot of ramping up on their end before they could even focus on the funds themselves. Some programs did not even open till May, and some programs didn't open until June. But since those programs have opened, there has been a ramp up. I'll just bring up one instance. Texas, it's a larger state, so it has more funds to get out. They actually had been ramping up for some time. They had some growing pains. They had to restart their entire system back in March. They had to reboot that, so they've had some challenges along the way. But as of May, they had $140 million had gone out. As of this week, it's $550 million. A state official there told me that on a good day, this is not the average, but on one day, they moved $17 million in funds. So that's just one example of how this ramp up has continued. Illinois did not open their program until more recently. They had not distributed any of those federal funds as of the end of May. Last week, they had distributed $130 million. So we have seen an escalation that is expected to continue in the coming weeks and throughout the summer and into the fall as well.
It really sounds like such a major endeavor for these state and local officials, Sarah. How has the White House been handling this issue?
It really has been a major endeavor. None of these states, none of these counties had the infrastructure to get out funds at this large a scale. And that was really emphasized by the White House. They held a eviction prevention summit more recently. They're really calling for an all-hands-on-deck approach to try and stop this from being as painful for many people. And so they've been working specifically with these states and these local programs on getting the funds out. They've also been trying to engage the courts as well as legal experts to make sure folks have legal counsel. The real focus is making sure there are eviction diversion programs in place and making sure that there is as many ways as possible to keep people in their homes into the future as this money gets out there.
Finally, Sarah, what are some of the larger implications this crisis could have on the country as a whole?
Yeah, so we talk about the evictions and how those will put people out of their homes, but there's a bigger problem here in the United States that we already are facing an affordable housing shortage. That is something lawmakers want to address in future legislation. But for the evictions themselves, it's not just having to move to another home and the challenges with that. In terms of evictions, experts will tell you people lose their possessions when they are put out of their homes. There's also the fact that it makes it hard for them to maintain a job when they don't have housing. For children who are in school, some of these families have children. It's hard for children to remain in school when they're put out of their homes. There's also the impact on credit scores moving forward, as well as the challenges of finding future housing when you have an eviction on your record and they ask you about your past housing experiences. So this really leads to multiple challenges. There are mental and physical health issues that can stem from the stress of the situation. So really the goal is to avoid this at all costs, to make it as seamless as possible, and to keep people in their homes with as much help as possible because of this pandemic and the real challenges it has brought forward in terms of housing.
Critically important issue. Sarah Ewall-Wice for us. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.